The storm had slowed by evening, but the sky stayed dark and heavy. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint sounds Samuel couldn't quite name. He stood near the window, watching the path that led through the forest. The snow was deep, untouched for now, but he knew that could change any minute. His hands rested on the old rifle he had cleaned that afternoon. Dusty, his old horse, was tied in the shed, restless and stamping. The air carried a feeling he couldn't ignore. Something was coming. Inside, the three women sat close to the fire. The youngest, Tala, looked frightened but tried not to show it. Naira kept whispering to her in their language, soft and steady, like a song to keep her calm. Lenza's eyes stayed on Samuel. She had lived long enough to know when danger was close. When Samuel finally turned from the window, she nodded slightly. She didn't need to speak for him to understand. They trusted him now. He moved quietly through the cabin, checking every corner. He placed extra logs near the fire to keep it burning bright. He closed the shutters tight and blew out the small lantern near the window, leaving the main light from the fireplace to cast long shadows across the walls. He motioned for them to stay near the back corner, out of sight. Then he waited. Hours passed. The only sounds were the fire crackling and the wind scratching against the door. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, came the sound of horses. Faint, slow, and careful. Samuel's jaw clenched. He stepped to the door and peeked through a small crack. 5 figures moved through the snow, dark shapes against the white. They stopped near the clearing, their breath misting in the cold. Samuel counted their steps. The men wore thick coats, one of them holding a lantern that swung back and forth. He could see rifles on their shoulders. Bandits, just like Lenza said. One of them shouted something. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was cruel, mocking. The sound of it made Tala flinch from across the room. Samuel felt his chest tighten. He took a breath, calm but firm. He wasn't a soldier. He was a man who had spent his life cutting trees, fixing roofs, living quietly. But tonight he wasn't alone. Those women were under his roof, and that meant something to him. Clara had always said that kindness was the only real strength left in this world. He had almost forgotten that until now. The men came closer, footsteps crunching in the snow. One of them kicked his sled aside and laughed. Another shouted, "Old man!" "We saw smoke. Come out!" Samuel didn't move. He waited, rifle in hand, his heart steady. When the knock came, a heavy, angry pounding, he spoke through the wood. "Leave this place," he said. His voice was calm but deep. "There's nothing here for you." Laughter answered him. "We think there is," one said. 3 of ours went missing days ago. They ran this way. Maybe you've seen them." Samuel said nothing. Another man stepped forward and slammed his shoulder against the door. The hinges shook. Samuel's muscles tensed. The women huddled closer together, whispering prayers under their breath. Then the door creaked again. The second hit was harder. Samuel raised his rifle and aimed at the frame. "Don't," he warned. His voice carried enough weight that for a moment they paused. But greed and anger make men foolish. The next hit splintered the door. The moment it swung open, Samuel fired. The shot echoed through the forest, scattering crows into the air. The man at the door fell back into the snow, shouting. The others ducked behind trees. Silence followed, heavy and cold. Smoke curled from the rifle barrel. Samuel stood still, his breath shallow. Inside, the fire flickered and the women stayed frozen, their eyes wide. Minutes dragged. Then one of the bandits shouted, "You'll pay for that, old man." They fired a shot toward the cabin, but it hit the wall wide. Samuel ducked behind the window frame. He counted the echoes, then slipped outside through the back door quietly. He knew the forest better than anyone. The moonlight glowed faint through the clouds, just enough for him to see shapes moving near the edge of the clearing. He circled wide, crunching snow carefully under his boots. When he reached the trees behind them, he raised his rifle again. The men didn't expect him there. He shouted, "Leave now while you still can." His voice came from the dark, echoing between the trees. The bandits turned in panic, looking in every direction. One fired blindly. The shot hit a branch above Samuel's head, snow falling in a burst. Samuel aimed low and fired again, hitting the lantern from one man's hand. The light went out, plunging them into near darkness. Panic spread fast. The men cursed and ran for their horses. Samuel watched from behind a pine as they stumbled over each other, shouting to retreat. The storm began again, wind howling through the trees. Within minutes, the forest swallowed them. Only silence remained. When Samuel returned to the cabin, the women rushed to him. Naira caught his arm, eyes filled with both fear and relief. Lenza said something in Apache, her voice trembling. He didn't understand the words, but the feeling was clear. Thank you. He smiled faintly and nodded. They're gone, he said. You're safe now, Tala cried softly beside the fire. The tension broke like glass. Samuel sat down, his hands shaking only now that it was over. The rifle leaned against the wall again. He looked into the fire, its light warm against his tired face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The storm kept them snowed in for 4 more days. Samuel shared what little food he had, teaching them how to chop wood and set traps while they taught him words and stories from their people. In the evenings, they sang again, songs about courage and home. One night, Lenza told him that their tribe would send searchers soon, that they had family waiting south. Samuel nodded, though his heart felt a quiet heaviness he didn't expect. He knew they would leave when the snow melted, and the cabin would be silent again. When the day finally came, the sun was bright and the air softer. The snow had begun to melt into clear streams. A small group of Apache men arrived, riding strong horses. They carried symbols of peace, their faces marked with both gratitude and sorrow. Lenza spoke with them, and Samuel understood from her expression that they were leaving. He helped them pack, tying blankets and supplies. Tala hugged him tightly before climbing onto one of the horses. She pressed something into his hand, a small necklace made of carved bone and turquoise. For you, she whispered. To remember. Naira smiled softly and said, You are friend now. Lenza was the last to speak. She looked at him for a long moment. You gave us life, she said. You will never be forgotten. They rode away slowly, disappearing into the trees the same way he had found them, quietly, like spirits carried by the wind. Samuel stood outside his cabin long after they were gone. He turned the necklace in his rough hands, the morning light catching the blue stone. Days turned into weeks and spring began to spread through the forest. Flowers pushed through the thawing ground and the sound of birds filled the air again. Samuel went back to his work, chopping wood and fixing the fence, but something had changed inside him. The silence didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like peace. Sometimes at sunset he would walk to the edge of the forest where he had first found them. The snow was gone now, but he could still see it in his mind, the moment that changed everything. He would look toward the distant mountains, wondering if they had made it home safely. He didn't need an answer. He knew he had done what was right. That summer, travelers passing through the nearby town told stories about a lumberjack who sheltered lost women during a storm, fighting off outlaws to keep them safe. Samuel never spoke about it himself. When people asked, he only smiled and said, The forest gives what you give to it. And on quiet nights, when the fire burned low, he would take out the small necklace and hold it close, remembering the warmth of voices that once filled his lonely cabin. The widowed lumberjack who had once lived for silence had found something greater, peace born from kindness and a heart made whole again. Winter slowly turned to spring in the Montana mountains, and Anna's new life began to take shape, like the thawing river near their cabin. Each day she woke before sunrise to make breakfast while John chopped wood outside. They worked side by side, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. But their silence never felt cold. It was the kind that said more than words could. The mountain taught them to move together, to listen to the sound of nature and each other's steps. At first, life wasn't easy for Anna. The snow was deep, the wind harsh, and the chores endless. She burned her hands the first week while cooking on the iron stove and cried quietly that night when John didn't see. But the next morning, when he noticed the bandage, he didn't scold or pity her. He just said, You're learning fast, and handed her his gloves. That simple kindness meant more than any gift she had ever received. The nearest town was 2 hours away by horse. Sometimes John took her there to trade wood for supplies. The townsfolk were curious about the tall foreign woman beside the quiet lumberjack. Some whispered that she must have been desperate to come all the way from Russia to live in the wild. Others smiled and said she looked strong enough to split logs herself. Anna didn't mind. She was used to whispers. But she noticed something. John never let anyone talk down to her. When one man at the trading post joked, She's taller than most trees out here, John smiled and replied, Then she's perfect for the forest. After that, no one dared to mock her again. As the snow melted, the forest turned green and their bond grew quietly, like the first flowers pushing through frost. They shared simple moments, laughing when the soup boiled over, fixing the leaky roof, or sitting by the fire while rain fell outside. Sometimes John would hum old songs from his childhood, his deep voice mixing with the sound of the firewood cracking. Anna often listened without speaking, her heart full of peace. One evening, while they were eating, Anna asked softly, "Why did you write to me?" He paused for a moment, then answered, "The agency sent me pictures of many women. All looked beautiful, but they seemed like they were waiting for someone to save them. Then I saw yours. You looked like someone who already saved herself." His eyes were steady when he said it, and Anna felt something stir deep inside her, a feeling she had never known before. It wasn't pity or admiration, it was respect. Months passed and their days settled into rhythm. She learned to mend his clothes, gather herbs, and handle the horses. He taught her how to swing an axe properly, how to read animal tracks, and how to listen for danger in the woods. They became a team, each task shared, each meal earned together. One morning, when John fell ill with fever after working in the rain, Anna took care of him for 3 days straight. She stayed awake by his side, wiping his forehead and whispering prayers. When he finally woke, his voice was weak, but his eyes were soft. "You stayed," he murmured. She smiled and said, "Where else would I go?" When summer arrived, the whole logging camp invited them for a gathering. It was the first time Anna met the other workers and their families. At first, everyone stared at her. Some were shy, others curious, but soon she was helping the women prepare food, laughing with the children and sharing stories from her old village. The men were surprised when she lifted a log heavier than most of them could carry. By evening, she was no longer the strange tall woman. She was just Anna, the one who worked as hard as any man and smiled like sunlight after rain. John watched her from across the fire, pride showing in his quiet gaze. That night, as they rode home under the stars, he said softly, "I think the mountains like you." She laughed and said, "Then I'll stay and keep them company." As months turned into a year, word spread to the agency that Anna Petrov had not returned. They sent her a letter, asking if she wanted to cancel her profile or try again with someone else. Anna read the letter by the fire, smiled, and wrote a single line in reply, "Please remove my name. I have found my place." In the fall, John took her to the small mountain church. The pastor had known him for years and smiled when John said he wanted to marry. The ceremony was simple. Anna wore a dress she sewed herself from white linen, and John wore his cleanest shirt. The people from the logging camp came, bringing flowers, bread, and laughter. When she walked down the little dirt path, sunlight fell through the pine trees like golden threads. John stood waiting, his eyes shining, holding a wooden box he had carved with his own hands. When the pastor asked if he would take her as his wife, John didn't hesitate. "I will," he said firmly. When it was Anna's turn, her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "I will." As they exchanged rings, John leaned closer and whispered just for her, "They said you were too tall. Guess they just didn't reach high enough." Anna laughed through tears, the sound soft and joyful. After the wedding, they returned to their cabin, now their shared home. They carved their initials into the wooden door, JM and AP, and planted 2 young pine trees nearby. John said they would grow together, just like them. Each morning, Anna watched the sunrise through the trees and felt thankful. The girl who once traveled across oceans only to be rejected had found peace among mountains that didn't judge her. In time, travelers who passed through the logging road would sometimes see the tall woman working beside her husband. Some thought she looked like part of the mountain, strong, graceful, and rooted. She no longer carried sadness in her heart. Instead, she carried strength born from all the pain she had survived. Years later, when new workers arrived and heard whispers about a mail-order bride who was sent back 10 times, they expected to find a bitter woman. But when they met Anna Miller, they found someone different, a woman with bright eyes and steady hands who always greeted strangers with warmth. If they asked about her past, she would smile and say, "I took a long road to find my home, but I'd walk it again if it led me here." As seasons passed, her story quietly spread through the valley. People began saying the lumberjack's wife brought luck to the forest, that trees grew straighter where she walked and storms passed faster when she smiled. Whether it was true or not, everyone agreed that something about her presence made the mountain feel alive. On long winter nights when snow covered the world outside, Anna and John would sit by the fire. Sometimes they spoke about the past, Sometimes they sat in silence, their hands touching as the flames danced. John would often say, "You changed this place." She would shake her head and reply, "No, it changed me." When she looked at him, she didn't see a rescuer. She saw a man who had given her the simplest and rarest gift, acceptance. And when he looked at her, he didn't see a foreign bride. He saw his equal, the woman who made his lonely cabin a home. As years went by, their cabin aged but never lost its warmth. The 2 pine trees outside grew tall, just like Anna had. People passing through often stopped to rest beneath them, not knowing that the woman who once felt unwanted had built her life here. One log, one smile, one season at a time. And if anyone ever asked John Miller how he found such a wife, he would just smile and say, "She wasn't meant to be sent back. She was meant to stay." In the end, Anna's story wasn't about rejection anymore. It was about finding the one place and the one person where she could finally stand tall. Not because of her height, but because she was loved for exactly who she was.